I never thought I'd be one of those kind of people that if I didn't have my phone, I'd be discombobulated. But undoubtedly, I've left my phone sitting on the table at home, so I don't even know what time it is. Isn't that awful? A phone, and I probably use it to call people. Those that know and love me know that calling on a phone is probably not one of my favorite things. So I'll probably use my phone less for calling than I do for other things. But I don't have my phone today, so the problem with that is the Bible that I use, the print is very small. And my phone's a little bigger. So when it comes time to read, I'm going to have some people step up and read. All right. Jesus the Christ, lesson 9. Sheets in the back. If you didn't get one, we can sure make that happen for you. Card number or question number 76. The garden where Jesus prayed. Okay? That is the Garden of Gethsemane. Garden of Gethsemane. If you turn to John chapter 18, or if you just want to write it down, John 18 verse 2 has a little sidebar, a little comment about Jesus and His association or His frequency at going to this garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. And it says something to the effect of, He met with the disciples there often. Okay? So He frequently visited this garden of Gethsemane. And we're going to talk just a little bit more about it today. Last week, through our discussion, through our cards, we talked about the institution of the Lord's Supper. This is during the Passover, Thursday evening of the last week before Jesus is crucified. In fact, Jesus is going to be crucified within about a 24-hour period of this. And we frequently read sometimes, before we partake of the Lord's Supper, Matthew's account of the institution of the Lord's Supper. And at the end of that, they said after they sang a song, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Okay? So that's kind of where we're at. Did that make sense what I just said? After they did the Lord's Supper, Judas asks, am I going to be the one to betray you? Peter, during that discussion, I'll never deny you. And then after the Lord institutes the Lord's Supper, it says they sang a song and they went out to the Mount of Olives. You remember that verse? Us reading it before the Lord's Supper? Okay. So that's kind of where we're at. So when they go out to the Mount of Olives, this is where they end up at this garden. This garden is at the foot of the Mount of Olives. It's about a half a mile from Jerusalem. Best I can tell, nobody knows exactly the location of this garden. And I often think that's a remarkable thing that we can figure out all these other things about Jesus' life, and they have memorials and they have, we would call them signposts, those, this happened here, and people make them a memorial, don't they? And this seems to me like a garden at the foot of Mount of Olives called Gethsemane would be one that they could pretty well pinpoint the location. And from my reading, they don't know exactly where it's at. I think there's a reason for that, right? Kind of the same reason that God buried Moses and nobody knows where Moses exactly was buried. What would people have done? What have people done to these so-called religious sites They make a high place, a holy place, something that becomes more than it should be. Okay? We're going to find out that they don't know exactly where Calvary, Golgotha, the place of the crucifixion is. We don't know exactly where the tomb was, do we? I think there's a reason for that. And I think it's what John says. Men will go overboard and we'll start, for lack of, I can't think of a better word, they'll start worshiping the site, the place. And what should we be concerned about? Okay, worshiping God, worshiping Jesus. These are events in Jesus' life, places where the things occurred. It's not the place that's to be worshipped. It is these places, these sites to be remembered because of what Jesus did there or what happened to Jesus at these places. Does that make sense? Okay, so Gethsemane simply means a place of oil presses. Okay? It's at the Mount of Olives. I'm assuming that's an olive grove, place where olives are harvested. And somewhere on this site, on this property, on the Mount of Olives, is an olive oil press. And at that press, around that press, there is a secluded, peaceful place that Jesus went to, a garden. I'm not sure it's a garden like we think of a garden. Lots of flowers and butterflies and gazebos and trellises. Not sure it's that kind of garden, just kind of a peaceful gathering place where there was an olive press. So it was called Gethsemane. Okay? The Garden of Gethsemane. So it's at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Means place of the olive press, about a half mile from the city of Jerusalem. At the foot of the Mount of Olives. Remember, from the Mount of Olives you could see the temple. The disciples had pointed out, look at that. Look how beautiful the temple looks. That's when Jesus had told them that the temple was going to be destroyed. Comparing that to himself, and after 3 days build it back up. But he was talking about the actual physical temple being destroyed by the Romans. And they said from the Mount of Olives vantage point, look how beautiful that building is. And so we know it was very close, about a half a mile. In this account, I've got up here Mark chapter 14, 32 through 42. But if somebody would read from, let's go to Matthew. Let's go to Matthew's account. Matthew chapter 26. If you want to mark down, I think maybe, is it on the paper, Mark 14? On the question sheet? Oh, it's not. It's Matthew's count, okay? But if you want to put this down, Mark 14, 32 through 42, this is a parallel account. But somebody, if you would, read 36 through 38 of Matthew 26. Okay, stay here and watch with me. Now what happens? We remember the account. At least he checks on them 3 times. Each time they're asleep. We remember that, right? At the end of that, he tells them, go ahead and sleep. You're going to need your rest. And almost immediately then what happens? So he goes there to pray with the disciples. What else happens here at Gethsemane that we should be aware of? Okay? First of all, Judas shows up with this mob, right? What does Judas do? Kisses him, a betrayal kiss, points out this is Jesus, We'll also talk about in the next card, or maybe the card after that, some more about that situation. But this was where Jesus was betrayed and arrested on this night after he had instituted the Lord's Supper. We're getting close. We're sometime between Thursday evening and then the clock going to midnight and it being early Friday morning. So just keep that in mind that that's the timeline that we're at. So Thursday evening, we talked about last week the what word am I looking for? The institution of the Lord's Supper. Now we're in the garden. Jesus has prayed. Appears to me like he's prayed for several moments, maybe hours. Comes and goes at least 3 times. Checks on the disciples. They can't stay awake. So as you see, we're getting very close, very late in the evening. Judas comes, betrays him. We also know at that point, Peter pulls out his sword. Remember, Peter had said, Lord, not only would I go to prison for you, I'll die for you. Jesus tells him what? You may feel that way, but in a very short period of time, you're going to deny me. Peter takes out his sword, cuts off the servant's ear. Jesus restores that. They take Jesus from Gethsemane. So let's jump back. We just talked about Judas. Judas is one of the apostles, one of the 12 chosen by Jesus. Jesus chose Judas. Judas had I'm going to do air quotes, earthly place of prominence within the group. What was his place within the group? You remember? Okay, he was the treasurer, so that would have been something that they would have maybe decided, hey, we'd like Judas to do, and maybe he was just the kind that said, hey, I'll do that, and grabbed it, and, maybe that was all. But there was some kind of prominence to having the money, right? Okay? No, it wasn't that inner circle of Peter, James, and John, but it was still a place of prominence. But Judas is going to betray him. We don't know what Judas' motives are, necessarily. From a standpoint of what was he trying to accomplish. You can read books, you can see there's movies. Some of those old late 50s, early 60s movies that seem to be all the rage back at that time. You can sit down on certain holidays and watch the 10 Commandments and Ruth and David and Bathsheba. Just seemed to be during the 50s and 60s this trend of taking a Bible story and making a Hollywood movie out of it. But they can't just leave it alone, can they? They have to put their earthly take on it, take on everything. And so you can see, my point is, so you can see from these movies that depict Judas was upset at Jesus because he didn't think he was moving quick enough. We're going to be an earthly kingdom and you're kind of dragging your feet. So this is going to spur you on, force you to do something. Several other kinds of motives that humans have tried to depict. The Bible doesn't tell us other than it kind of clues us in on, as we talked a while ago, he was the treasurer, he was the money holder of the group. He's going to get paid to do this, so maybe it was just out of pure greed. He wanted some money and thought this was a way to get money. That's the closest thing that I can tell you for it being a motive. He wanted some money. And what was that betrayal price? 30 pieces of silver. Now, it doesn't tell us the size of this, or it doesn't tell us the denomination or exactly what it is. So this could be anywhere from, in today's monetary amounts. It could have been something that was a daily wage, a denarius, maybe, or something similar to that. So anywhere from about $100 to $2,500. And I know that's a big span, but still think about it. To betray somebody, to turn them over to the authorities, a bounty maybe, $100 to $2,500 is still not very much, is it? And it's supposed to have been his friend. Yeah. And we talked about it last week, and it always strikes me. We talked about the foot washing. Jesus knew what was going to happen. Judas, just after that, is going to ask him, is it me that's going to do it? And Jesus knew and says, go do what you got to do. Do it quick. Jesus washed Judas's feet, knowing what was going to happen. So there's 30 pieces of silver, not a whole lot. But he goes and secures this from the priests. This is done before the Last Supper. The Last Supper that we talked about, the institution there in Matthew 26. You can read about this in Matthew chapter 26, verse 15. Verse 25 is where Judas asks, is it I? Judas returns. We'll talk about that in a second. This is not a real picture of that event, by the way. They didn't have photography back then. I know I say that every time. Boy, that's... You think that's how it was out in the open? Or do you think it was in a room somewhere secretive? So Judas comes to the garden. He kisses Jesus. He betrays him. They take Jesus away for the arrest. They're going to have some trials. We'll talk about that as we go through. At some point, something happens within Judas, within his mind, within his heart. I'm going to go as far as to say that he had remorse. He had regret. You think he had some guilt? We're going to jump down to card 83 because these two questions go together. Okay, from 77, let's go down to 83. At some point, maybe seeing Jesus being beaten or mistreated or handled the way that the Jews were handling him and the way the Roman officials were handling him, something happened and Judas became sorrowful, regretted, maybe that's a good word, we might say that, he regretted what he had done. To the point that we know that he went back to the priest, the same people that he had been bribed by or got the betrayal price from. And what did he do with the money? He returned it, but but when he returned it, he didn't have it in a bag. He didn't have it in a bag, or he didn't have it and kindly hand it back to him. What does it say that he did? He threw it back at him, tossed it back at him. Okay? So this regret, remorse, sorrow, that's emotions, isn't it? There's one word that kind of means those things, and sometimes we use it interchangeably. because they each have a part of this expression. I haven't used the word repent, did I? He regretted it. He was sorrowful for it. He had grief for it. He had all these emotions that we talk about for repentance, right? But what didn't he have? I've got it down here. Grief, guilt, remorse. He had the emotions. He went and returned the money. Well, that's a good start. There's no way that he could have done what he done and repented of it and kept the money. So he needed to return the money. But what else did he need to do? His actions, his physical actions were not the appropriate response. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because what did he immediately do? Jump back here. He killed himself. We can find out from Acts. What's the other scripture? Matthew 27. Acts chapter 1 verse 8. After he did this, he didn't control his actions to do everything that he could to make it right, to repent. He had the emotional part of it, but he didn't have the turning his life part right. Going in one direction, the betrayal, his guilt, his regret, his remorse, our guilt, our grief, our remorse causes us from going this way to now going the opposite way, or at least a different way. But where did his grief lead him? To kill himself. He couldn't see a way out. What should he have done? Could have been at the cross. I was thinking even something a little more specific that we can do. It never mentions one time that he got down on his knees and prayed. He needed to pray and ask for forgiveness. I guess he didn't have to get on his knees, did he? But you understood my point. He should have prayed, asked for forgiveness, and then went to the cross. Been there on the day of Pentecost. Became a missionary wherever he was told to go. Speaking to this group or that group, just like the other apostles did, we know from secular history. They went all over the world. But Judas didn't do that, did he? He took a different way out. He committed suicide. What happened to his body? After a while, I always thought about it this way. After a while, the rope finally just gave loose and he hit the ground and just disintegrated everywhere. What happened to the money? 30 pieces of silver. Bought a potter's field. Jeremiah 32. If you want to read about that. I didn't write it down here. I've got it somewhere. We'll come across it. Yeah, Jeremiah 32. I've got it on this other. Burial grounds for the poor. A potter's field. Okay. Brought the betrayal money back. The chief priests and elders threw it on the ground. We talked there quite a bit about he had the emotions, but his emotions led him to the wrong physical. And you understand what I mean there, the physical response. It's changing, the outward changing. He had maybe the inward going on. He was feeling something, but it led him in the wrong direction. He killed himself instead of making it, and as I put up here, making an appropriate response. All right, the trials of Jesus. We'll end up here with this question. 4 men are named that tried Jesus. There is a fifth, what I would call a group, but we're going to name the 4. Annas, Caiaphas, Pilate, and Herod. Have you ever heard of those guys? Probably heard of them more because of the trial of Jesus than we have anything else. Annas and Caiaphas are mentioned in other places. Of course, Herod is. Herod, the same Herod that had John the Baptist beheaded. And then we're going to talk about Pilate as well. Annas, a high priest that was installed by the Romans. They didn't like the way he did things, so they kind of took that office away from him and installed Caiaphas. Caiaphas being his son-in-law. But the Jews didn't recognize the Romans' authority for removing Annas. And so at this point, really when you read about it, both are called high priests. Now, according to the law of Moses, there's only supposed to be one high priest. So they had things kind of mixed up. But we're going to keep this in mind. Roman influence caused there to be really 2 named high priests. If you wanted to really boil it down, Caiaphas is the high priest, but Annas would have had influence from being a previous high priest. We don't need to, we can get down and talk more about it if you want to, but that's just a good way to keep it in mind. Annas, his son-in-law Caiaphas, Pilate, and we'll talk about Herod as well. Herod being the son of Herod the Great. As I mentioned, it's Herod Antipas. Antipas being called similar to the son of. That's what that means. So he is similar or the son of Herod. Pilate is a Roman appointee, and so we'll talk about those as we go through this a little bit more. All right, so Annas, a high priest, he's recognized more by the Jews. Caiaphas, a high priest, he's kind of been installed and put in place there by the Romans. Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, and Herod Antipas, he's the son of Herod the Great. He's more over Galilee, the northern region, being taking that part of his of Herod the Great's rule. All right, so here we'll put this up here and we'll leave it there for a while if you want to make some notes. John 18:12 through 14. We see that Jesus is hauled before Annas. A lot of things that are wrong with this, according to Jewish law, happened at night. It was done in secret. Jesus did not have someone there on his behalf. The false witnesses, all these things that we see that makes this an illegitimate kind of trial. But they needed Annas' approval. The Jews did. Remember, he's the one that they looked to be the high priest. They wanted his approval, and that's what they got. Annas is going to find him guilty. He's going to say it's okay to proceed to the next level. So then they take him to Caiaphas. That's Matthew chapter 26, 57 to 66. He's also going to find him guilty, and you're going to see that the main charge is blasphemy. Okay? The main charge is blasphemy. What did Jesus do that was blasphemous? Okay? On several occasions, he compares himself or says that he is God. So the charges are blasphemy associated with claiming to be God, claiming to be the king of the Jews. That's what they're saying. He threatened to destroy the temple. That's one of the charges that they're going to bring up. They previously said that he had violated the Sabbath, and his disciples had violated the Sabbath, and he was accused of sorcery. Remember, he was healing with the power of the devil. And so get all these things together, but basically it comes down to they're saying that he is being blasphemy with God. What's the sentence for blasphemy in the law of Moses? Stoning by death, stoning to death specifically. So that's what they're trying to get to. So Caiaphas, you read that, he says you're guilty of that. Remember, he'd been out previously to get Jesus anyway. So then they have to go, not on the card, but he has to go before the Sanhedrin and they have to approve it. They have to make the sentence legal, which they do. And so now the Jews, because they legally are under Rome, can't put someone to death without Rome's approval. They've got to go now to get Rome's approval. So they take Jesus to Pilate. That's John chapter 18, 28 through 38. And during the course of this, what is Pilate's conclusion? Can't find anything wrong with him. And in an interesting turn of events there, and we could spend a lot more time on this, we're kind of briefly going through it. During this course, it's brought out, mentioned that Jesus is from where? Where's his hometown? Nazareth in Galilee. And so when Pilate hears Galilee, he goes, I've got a way out. I've got a loophole. I'm going to send him to Herod Antipas, who is over the Galilean region, and I'm going to get him to deal with this. Now, Herod and Pilate, they certainly weren't friends. In fact, they were kind of adversaries. But Pilate's going to use Herod. Okay? So Pilate sends Jesus to Herod after not finding anything to find him guilty about. So I put up here not guilty. So he goes to Herod. Luke 23, first 12 verses there. And after examination by Herod, what's Herod's conclusion? Really doesn't tell us that he finds him guilty or not guilty. I put not guilty up here because it didn't say guilty. So if you're not guilty, then you have to be, if you're not found guilty, then you have to be found not guilty. Boy, that confused me. But anyway, what does Herod do? He's going to send him back. He's going to send him back to Pilate. And because of this, and one last time Herod beats him. And I think it says there that at that point, Pilate and Herod have a common bond. I'm not going to say they become friends, but that animosity between them kind of goes away because of both of their treatments of Jesus. So John 18:39 through 19:6, we talk about the final of these trials. Jesus before Pilate. Pilate is trying to do everything that he can to release Jesus because he knows that he's not guilty. We're going to learn about Barabbas next week. We're going to learn about Pilate's motives. He had the authority, he had the ability, he had everything that he needed to release Jesus because he was not guilty. We're going to find out why he didn't. We'll do that next week. We'll finish up, hopefully, with lesson number 9 next week. Remember, Annas, Caiaphas, his son-in-law, goes to Sanhedrin. Pilate determines, hey, I can get out of this because he's Galilean. I can send it over to Herod. Herod doesn't do anything with it, sends it back to Pilate. Pilate is there. Symbolically, what's Pilate going to do? Because he's going to turn him over to the Jews, he's going to wash his hands. He's going to wash his hands of the situation. There you go. And we'll get to who was released in the place of Jesus next week. Appreciate your participation. We'll take a short break and we'll be back for our worship period.